Hey, good morning. It is 9 o'clock, and I am Kip Garvey. No, Kip, I'm sure will be here in a minute, and we'll really get into this thing. Let me mention, please, that this session will be taped, so I will use the mic, although I'm sure you could probably hear me without it, and anybody that has a comment, everybody is welcome to make any comments you'd like to make. Please come to the microphone, and like we always have in the past, just sort of line up there and wait your turn and say whatever you'd like to say at the microphone for the benefit of the tapers. As you know, this session is to discuss the combined list of mainstream with a few plus figures that supposedly we can teach in 25 weeks. Last year in Baltimore, I assume many of you were there in Baltimore. I was up here on the podium for several sessions, and just as a guesstimate on my part, I'm just quite confident that 95 to 98% of everybody there in Baltimore last year knew that we had to do something as far as the teaching lists were concerned, and that is to reduce the number of classes taught. And when that point came out, my first question was, okay, that's fine. We're going to reduce the number of classes taught. What are we going to take off the list? And I think it was about 100% consensus that we didn't want to take anything off the list. Now, that's a pretty hard chore to reduce the number from 41 or so down to 25 and then without taking anything off the list. I think that's obvious. Also, there was a strong feeling by many people that their clubs, all the clubs in their particular area, dance plus, and that is why and how this particular list we're talking about evolved. If you even reduce the list and taught 25 weeks and put people out at what we would call a soft or easy or a little reduced mainstream level, they still go to a dance and they'd be blown away. So that's why this list was brought out with a few of the plus figures on it. Like I said, we are here to discuss what you feel about that. Now, I think you're all aware that we did not have the list in time for most of us to use it for 25 weeks. I don't think it's been 25 weeks since we received our list. However, I have talked to several people that have used the list and completed it by having multiple sessions in 1 week. And what I'd like to do right now, I'd like to ask, are there any people here that have used this combined list, including the plus figures, and completed a 25-week program, or 25-session program? Joe Pastupa, gentleman over here, yeah, you were in yesterday. Keith, you finished it up. What I'd like to do, first of all, is ask these people that have completed the list to come up and give us some comments on it, and then we'll take comments from everybody. But the first thing I'd like to do is hear these people that have completed using the 25-week list, including the plus figures. I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. Joe Pastupa.
Darryl, I use the list, and it's the first time in since I was up north teaching and in Florida teaching. Of course, we get dances for a limited period of time, and making a transition is a very simple task if you use the list. I'm all for getting some list that we can all teach throughout the country, a standardized teaching list. Now, I'm not for fooling around with the plus figures. I don't care what CALLERLAB has on their plus list or on their mainstream list. I'm not for subtracting figures, but I want some tool to come from CALLERLAB, and this is the first tool that has come from CALLERLAB that we can use to teach people how to dance and get them into the flow of square dancing where actually they feel like they're doing something that their friends are doing. Now, I don't see any A2 dancers out there recruiting people and bring them into my class. I don't see any A1 dancers bringing in new people to the class. It's all the people who graduated the year before bringing people into the class. Now, I can understand that the people up north want to graduate plus dancers because most of the clubs up north are plus clubs if they've been in business for a while. And we have to get something, and this is a transition period where you can teach a plus call to these people, have them enjoy it and do something, and you can bring them into the club activity at that point. The transition point is where you lose a lot of the dancers. And if you can keep them happy with the plus dancers in the club by them doing just simple figures, and if the callers did their homework a little bit, I feel that we're on a threshold of something big here at CALLERLAB by getting a tool into the callers' hands finally that we can all use and teach our dancers. The next thing is on the list that we have to do is get the dancers someplace they can go after they learn this list. That's the current criteria. Where do they go after they learn the list? That's the next thing we have to work at CALLERLAB, providing dances throughout the country. Where they go after they learn the list. Having dances at this level for them. A soft plus possibly is the answer. But I have used it in my reaction from all my dancers, because I asked them specifically before I left, did you like what I've taught you this past year? And to a 1, they said we loved it. And I have started a soft plus dance form, and my plus dancers even came to their dance before the actual plus dance and enjoyed it. So I'm all for it. And I think the callers who will use this list and give it a fair shot, I think 1 year is not enough. We've got to give it another year. But I think when we leave CALLERLAB, we as callers must lead the activity. And with a tool like this, we can be leaders once again. Thank you.
A couple of questions, Joe.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You call for basically a plus club at some time, one night of the week.
Oh, sure.
Okay. And this class is on a different night.
Correct.
Okay. And once you graduate this class, they could go and dance at your plus club as long as you're calling and you know what's been taught.
Well, I had a special dance before them. Before the plus level dance, I had a 2-hour session for just these people who were taking lessons. You see, before the dance or half-hour workshop. Up north, I realize it's more difficult where they're calling for a club. But when they first graduate, you can actually, if you're the club caller, you're the leader of that club, not your dancers. You're the leader.
That's correct.
Either your leader or your follower. So if you're leading, you can determine the level of the dance and make it interesting for everyone as long as these people know the basic plus calls that you're going to be using and work from that framework on. And what you left out, you can, most of the calls you can either spoon feed them right through and get them dancing with the rest of the people what they missed and have workshop tips during your plus club level dance that we in Florida always have a workshop tip anyway.
Good. Thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
Next gentleman, tell us your name, where you're from, please, sir.
I'm Wendell Law from the Lansing, Michigan area, and our association voted the minute this came out to use the entire program this year. We operate with what we call a Stepping Stones program every week. We start our lessons about September, middle of September, and by the first week of November, we start a Stepping Stone program every week with a different caller, and we try to get all of our class people to go. I presume everybody's experiencing the same thing we are. We don't have big classes anymore. We also, since the class has dropped off, so we don't have any mainstream clubs anymore. So you finish teaching these people normal mainstream, there's no place for them to dance unless you can get them all together at a stepping stone type of situation. But how are you going to take them into your own clubs? So when this came out, we thought, gee, maybe this is the way to go. So we've all used it. We have not had a meeting so that I can talk with the rest of the guys and see how they think it really went over. But at least our dancers were taken into club. They had 8 plus items already, and our plus dancers didn't seem to mind a bit that they didn't dance 28. They could only dance 8 maybe, but we're continuing on with workshops with our class. Our dancers come to help out, and by the end of another 8 weeks we'll have them fairly well through at least what's commonly used all the time in the plus program. And so far, as I see it in our area, it worked rather well, so the dancers could feel like they could go out and dance. As I say, we have not had a meeting. In fact, it was Sunday when I left, so they may have discussed it, but I'm not sure what their idea was after it was finished.
But you had a class beginning, like, let's say, 1st September, You had a class going when this list came out.
Right.
And you finished up this particular list we're talking about.
Yes. We had taught them some things naturally that was left out on the list, but we picked it right up from there and went on, taught the complete list then.
Okay.
And
you're
so far,
happy with it?
It seemed to have worked fairly well.
Good. Thank you, Wendell. Keith?
Keith Ripito from West Virginia. I just didn't start using this list. Our area is a small area. We've danced plus ever since I joined square dancing, or at that level, you know, used to be the intermediate or whatever you wanted to call it. We have never had the luxury of having 41-week programs. We couldn't recruit anybody. Darryl's came in and went to my lessons before.
Learned to dance, too.
Yeah, right. He did real well, y'all. I want you to know that right now. But anyhow, the approach has been in the 7 clubs that's in the area that I am, that the class and the club have, the club comes out and helps the class, the angel of the class, and that's one of the requirements. And what I do for the club for that is I do a workshop for the club, but that doesn't have any bearing on the 25. That keeps the club coming out and helping the angels, okay? But we've used this for years. The thing that most I think that helps is I'm very diligent with my teaching. I realize that we got 25 to 30 weeks max to get these people through lessons. I do leave out the left square through and the left swing through until down the line considerably, and we don't teach that. We just walk into and do it. There's nothing special about that. Everybody's doing that. I graduated the people this year with 26 lessons, and they seem to be doing all right. As you know, the area dances plus, and so when they come graduate into the club, the transition is still there, but it's not as scary as it would be coming out of mainstream into a plus club with no plus calls. I favor the program of a reduced, and I don't want to get a hot poker in the fire here. I don't agree with the italicized list at all. I think we need to reduce the list. That is my contention. That the calls that we're doing 2% of the time, or something like that, we need to get off the list, y'all. We can use something else. We need to get away from that. Make a realistic list for the people that maybe don't have the luxury of having class and club on the same night to do their lessons, to where that individual can get those people through the lessons in 25 weeks. Thank you.
Okay, we have 3 people that had completed the list, and if I got the feeling correct there, they're all fairly well happy with the situation in their particular area. I think all of us realize that if you teach this list and you send somebody out to the big festival that's 40 miles down the road, and a traveling caller comes in and calls, a lot of those people are going to have trouble. I think a lot of people are going to have trouble when they're brand new dancers anyway. It takes some time to learn to react. You all know that. Okay. Before we really just get into open discussion about all of this, having heard from the 3 people that had completed the 25-week combined list, Kip's going to talk to us for a few minutes. Mr. Kip Garvey. Good afternoon, Kip.
I could tell you some long, drawn-out story, complicated by all kinds of incidences and coincidences and why I was 10 minutes late. Simple fact of the matter is I overslept. I think honesty is probably the one virtue that's going to see us through all this list business. Most of you received the handout that was prepared for this particular session, combined mainstream plus list. If you notice, my voice goes down to another octave this hour of the day. It started right out with, we define the problem. I wrote it. I disagree with it. I think we're yet to define the problem. However, it does define reality. Now, we've received a number of letters in the office throughout the year regarding the 25-week Learn to Dance program. The situation has been so confused that a lot of these letters didn't even identify which 25-session Learn to Dance program they were talking about. A lot of the letters came in and said, very frankly, our College Association has voted not to use the 25-week Learn to Dance program. We don't know whether they're talking about the mainstream, bold, italicized, or whether they're talking about the combined mainstream plus. And we felt that if they couldn't tell us that, they probably weren't sure themselves. How sad it is that we have been unable to really identify the problem. We asked our membership to go out to experiment with an experiment that didn't define the problem. It's caused an awful lot of unrest, an awful lot of animosity. It's set us up in adversarial roles, something which we can ill afford if we're going to make any progress at all. Now, I think Darryl's already asked you how many are using this combined 25-week Learn to Dance program. How many of you are actually using it? This specific program. How many of you are using some sort of a combined mainstream plus program, even though it's not on this particular list or something like it? All right, do me a favor and clap your hands if you are, in fact, using some sort of a combined mainstream plus program. Would you please? Okay. I'm assuming, therefore, that the rest of you are not using any plus calls at all in your dance program, and you feel very adamantly that way. Is that true? I really respect that opinion. We have to really come to grips with the situation as it is. Most of the time, the letters that have come into the office have referred to standardization. If this program is implemented, where or what happens to standardization? It's gone. That's what they're saying to us. I can understand that rationale. I can certainly appreciate it. What that rationale fails to recognize is that we're living right now with a double standard. We have two standards that are equally viable. And if we fail to recognize that, then we will continue to exist in an adversarial role, and no solution that I can see is at hand. Folks, you heard the hand clap. These people are not teaching the plus calls because they want to. They're teaching the plus calls because they have to. Those of you who are teaching plus calls, you heard the hand clap. Those people are adamant about keeping plus calls off the mainstream list. They do not want them. If we cannot bring these two viewpoints closer together, then our double standard will continue to drift further apart. I think we have an opportunity to do that. I think we have an opportunity right now to recognize that what has happened is nobody's fault. I think we have an opportunity to recognize right now that if it is somebody's fault, it certainly was inadvertent. It just happened. And it happened for a lot of different reasons. We can waste an awful lot of time trying to figure out what those reasons are, which one is more important than the next, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in all this. But we have got to bring these two separate lines of direction back towards each other again, in my opinion. We have a list right now that is comprised of mostly mainstream calls, 98% mainstream calls, and has 8 plus calls in it. On the other side of the fence, we have a mainstream list that has the existing 68 calls. Some are italicized. Already the mainstream community is beginning to realize that the italicized calls are probably going to be eliminated, or some of them will be eliminated. Some changes are at hand. The plus community has already recognized that it can live without certain plus calls. Can we begin to realize that we are really just this far apart? That far apart. If we can just come together on this thing. My respect and admiration goes out to the mainstream callers in their mainstream communities who have taken what CALLERLAB has said, who have gone out and exercised the mainstream program, who have fought diligently for 7 or 8 years to keep that mainstream pure. My sympathy goes out to them when they say to me, Kip, if this thing is passed or anything like it, we have to go back to our people and say, even though we've told you for the last 8 years that nothing's going to change, we've frozen the program, we've got some changes for you. What happens to our integrity? What happens to our professional integrity? Tough question. Real tough question. I don't know. I think we're going to be left with the final decision of does the means justify the end? The lesser of two evils. Either that or we're going to continue with this double standard. There is no way that I can foresee that the combined mainstream plus community is going to backtrack and go back and develop mainstream programs. I know that it can be held back. I know that we can slow it down. I know that. But I don't think we can regress. Now, if you'll accept those facts as being a definition of the problem, and if we can begin from there and approach the problem, I think we can come up with a solution. It'll take cooperation. It'll certainly take flexibility on everybody's part. It'll take recognition of the fact that we may not have correctly identified our programs when we first started. I always thought that was strange, that we would figure that the very first time we designed a dance program, mainstream and plus, or whatever, that it was right. That everybody would be able to dance that around the world. I think that is probably true if we went out with a clean slate. But in real time, that dance definition was defined when people were already dancing. Suppose they were already dancing something more than mainstream when the definitions were made, the dance program definitions. Would you expect these people to backtrack and forget it and go back and do something else? And what happens about tomorrow or the years to come down the road? Are we going to accommodate change or not? If the answer is no, I think we might be headed down the road of a major schism. A schism similar to the schism experienced with traditional and folk dancing back east in the early 50s when modern Western square dancing came on the scene. So let's get to it. Let's really get to it. You can call me anything you want. I can accept the names. But let's talk to the issues, talk to the problems, and find a solution. I got a problem with this list. I got a bunch of problems with this list. I like left-handed waves. My people dance left-handed waves. I like Dixie style. I like to see it back on there. He and I call together. Does anybody have any problems with this list? We're here for an analysis and a feedback on this specific list, and I sure would like to hear if anybody has any trouble with the list. Yeah. Yeah, come on up to the mic and identify yourself. This is being taped.
My name's Bob Rollins. I'm currently living down in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, with the geckos and cactus and things like that. I'm in an isolated environment, so I think I could probably use this 26 without going to jail, you know. And I've used it, and it works quite well for me. But the problem, as I see it, is that the problem is very complex. It is not something simple that you're going to solve in a day. Each and every one of us are from a different area. We have different problems. We have different dancers. And we have a media problem. We have moved and tweaked and massaged and added movements. We've taken movements away, not enough. Whatever happened to the 50 basics? What happened to that 11 or 15 week job or do that we had 10, 15 years ago? If you want to teach shorter classes, you know, dig out the 50 basics and go with that. Have a basics club. What's wrong with that? Can't we call basic anymore? I don't understand it. Why do we have to be super A, C's, and callers? I don't think that's necessary. I think we should be able to call at any level, and we should adjust to that. Now, in the plus area, if you add a movement, subtract one. Stay at 100, let's say. 50 basics, add 25, make that mainstream. Add 25, make that plus. Put that in those levels, And if you add another mainstream, you better be willing to subtract one. Then you're staying at a given number, and everything should be running a lot easier, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. The mainstream program and the plus program, as you all know, are unchanged. This is purely experimental. As a member of the executive committee, could I apologize to you? Would you please accept my apology for a rather misleading press release that came out in July? That press release, unfortunately, was written at a time when even we were struggling to try to identify what the problem is. The wording in that press release led all readers to believe that there were 5 separate dance programs. I sure didn't walk away from Baltimore thinking there were 5 different dance programs. I walked away from Baltimore saying, finally, we're going to get a chance to examine what is happening out there among callers in real time. As far as I knew, nothing had changed with our dance programs. Now, Bob, you spoke to the issue of adding and deleting calls from the dance program. That is an appreciative thought. The question is, what about this experiment? What about this 25-week Learn to Dance program? Should we add calls, delete calls? Should we implement this program? Should we get rid of it? What are your thoughts?
Hi, Steve Billings from South Florida. As I see it, I think we got 2 problems. Number one is we're talking about standardization, and yet we're talking about different areas of the country and different areas of the world and different dancers and different levels that are prevalent. The second thing I see is a shortened program that makes entry level, no matter what the prevalent dance level is in the area, short enough that we can still get people and keep them and get them dancing at that particular entry level. Now, I don't know whether this program or any other is any better or worse, but I'd like to offer a possible solution that would standardize and yet still solve the other problem of entry level. And that is, rather than have a mainstream or a basic or a plus list per se, number one, cut out all the deadwood, i.e. the italicized moves in the mainstream list, or at least a bunch of them. And I'm sure there's also some in the plus list that we don't use very often that we could also cut out, and do that now and not wait another year or 2 years down the road. The second thing is, whatever happened to the idea of maybe doing a module-type system and break down the moves in all of the different lists to modules, so that then you have a caller has the ability to maybe teach, if he's in a mainstream area, to teach all of the modules that pertain to the mainstream moves. If he's in a predominantly plus area, he teaches, say as an example, the modules that have the boldface moves, and then move on to the plus list and the modules in the plus list, starting out with those that are on this list as an example, and then moving on up. And then, as time permits, or as interest is there, to move back to the other modules that have the other less well-known or less used moves as he sees fit. That's a suggestion.
Thank you.
Keith Ripito again. As one that's used a 25-week program ever since I started calling. Okay?
When was that? Last what, July?
3 weeks ago, and Jerry Higgs signed my accreditation, so I got in CALLERLAB. But anyhow, I would like to suggest, we're talking about lists, folks, and primarily in my mind, and I was on the ad hoc committee that came up with this, and we sat in that room and cussed and discussed everything, and we took a straw vote, and I'm not suggesting that now, although I'd like to see it, of what is the level of the square dancers in the United States. Let's just lump it. And the feeling was it was soft plus. Everybody wanted to do the mainstream. They wanted to do load the boat, relay the doocy, and spin chain to gears, and maybe something else. And through that, I thought we were going to come up with a 25-week program that related to what we had went through on the straw vote. I don't really see all that. I like Dixie style also. But anyhow, what I'm suggesting for the not being so complicated, why don't we just come out and say, we would like to say, here's a 25-week program. It's called square dancing. You can do it in 25 weeks, and most of the people that you graduate from this can go to any festival. They could go to any weekend, and they'll be able to dance it. I have a close relationship with my dancers like everybody else, and the thing that they want is they don't want to have to wait another year to dance with the people that invited them to come out and dance.
we're not addressing that issue. We're trying to make too much out of this list thing. Us realize that our future's in the hands of the dancers, and if we don't start listening to them, all these lists that you're coming up with mean nothing. Thank you.
Chris Veer from England and Germany and Texas and various other places. I'd like to preface my remarks by saying that in the 80,000 miles a year that we travel, square dancing is very, very healthy in all of those areas that have a very healthy mainstream program. Those areas that are only dancing at the plus level are having, like Michigan and California and some other places, are having a great deal of difficulty in recruiting new people and keeping new people. Those places where mainstream is very healthy, the whole activity is very healthy. And I have a couple of remarks here, and we might make some people mad, and it might not. If it does, I'm sorry. Whatever the shortcomings of the program that we have, it's very easy to lay where the blame is. The blame is here. Whatever's wrong with the program, it's our fault. And we have to recognize that. The level system that we have has been a godsend to some of us. The more levels we have, the more sessions we can have, the more books we can write, the more tapes we can sell. That's more money, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we have to ask ourselves if we created the levels for our benefit or for the benefit of the activity as a whole. The system has become a monster, which we don't have very much control of. A class system has developed between the dancers, between the A dancer, the C dancer, and the mainstream dancer. And whether we want to recognize that fact or not, it's there. And excuse me while I turn a page. I'm not opposed to anybody dancing plus. I'm not opposed to anybody dancing A or C or whatever they want to dance. For those who have the time and the inclination, they're perfectly acceptable activities. But we've got to recognize the fact that by shortchanging the teaching process, we're shortchanging the activity. And in the long haul, we're the people who are going to suffer for it. I think that this proposed list is a disservice to the new dancer and to the activity. If we only wish to create stepping stones to the higher levels, then it's perfect. If we want our dancers to go through the activity, we want to go through basics, into plus, into A, into C, and then over the edge into oblivion where we'll never see them again, I think this is just what we need. If we want people to learn to square dance and learn to love square dancing and learn to enjoy various levels and stay with the activity, I think we have to do some very serious rethinking. We do need a 25-week basic course. We had a wonderful one when we had 75 sets in all the basics. But we all know we can't go backwards. We can pause and evaluate what we have. We have the only form of dancing that people can learn to do, go out and enjoy, and then miss for 3 months and be unable to get back in. That's a minor inconvenience to them because there's a lot of other things in the world that they can do. It's a disaster for us because we've lost them and we've lost all their peripherals. We've lost their friends, we've lost their relatives, we've lost all of them forever. We'll never see them again. And can we, as service professionals providing a service, make a reasonable profit and still have a healthy program? And leave a healthy program for the people who are going to follow us? Will we as CALLERLAB satisfy the immediate needs of some of our members with little regard for the perpetuation of the activity? I can appreciate the long hours it took to prepare the list, but I have to hope, for all our sakes, that we have the good sense to put this list where it really belongs, and I think that's in file 13.
Thank you, Chris.
Virgil Forbes, Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. I'm with you. I really don't like this particular list. I like Dixie styles. I like left-handed waves. Right now we have essentially 3 teaching lists running around this convention. Our standard mainstream, This one, the 25-week italicized list. Of the three, I like this one best. We have got to get down to one and only one list. And I really don't care which one, as long as it's one. Standardization is the key. In the last 4 years, I've been to Australia, Japan, the Philippines, Singapore, as well as all over. I could square dance everywhere. All of those clubs overseas were using, quote, pure mainstream, plus load the boat and relay the deucey. What can we say? We're here to serve the dancers. We have to give the dancers what they want. We don't have to tell them why we come up with the list we do. We have to, however, give them a standard list, giving them as many of the moves as they want to dance as we can accommodate in a reasonable teaching or workshop criteria. In Baltimore, there is one pure mainstream club. I call for it. I have 8, 10 squares on the floor any given Friday night. After the dance is over, I call 1 plus tip. Pretty good plus. There's maybe 2 squares that leave the hall at 10:30 and don't dance plus. What's the story? The story is, if it's well called, the dancers don't care what level it is, if it's well constructed and well called. As I said, this is the best of the 3 lists in my mind, but I don't care which one as long as it's only one. Thank you.
Thank you, Virgil. Just a second, Norm. We had a fellow in line behind you there. Oh, was he ahead? Could I do a little experiment, Norm? I hate to usurp any time, but all of those of you who are teaching or currently calling in a predominantly plus environment, would you please stand up? Now do me a favor, and those of you who feel that you can successfully go home and tell your clubs that they're going to be mainstream from Wednesday morning on, would you please remain standing? Thank you. We have 3 still standing and 1 without a chair. We can begin to see how quickly this could turn into an adversarial contest. You know, the good guys can go home and do it, and the bad guys can't. Unfortunately, it does ignore the fact that our dancers are out there demanding that we do what they want. And that whole argument just begs that question to death. Next, Norm.
Norm Wilcox, Georgetown, Ontario, Canada. We have lived through the 75 basic program, and we taught it. Then along came Plus, and what we did in the Ontario area was to establish in our club structures a 3-level structure where we had 1 year of class, 1 year of mainstream, and then a 3rd club where we danced Plus. And in between the mainstream and the Plus, we instituted workshops where we started with the first Plus call and worked our way down to the bottom. But we're in a highly urban area where we have a lot of dancers, and we could do this. When I came here, I didn't know quite how we're going to reconcile the 2 approaches to this, but I do know one thing we have to do. We have to have a destination for people who enter the activity off the street and come through a series of classes, 25 weeks, and come out the other end. We have to have a place for them to dance. And if the reality of the world is that this place includes track 2, load the boat, relay the deucey, and does not include peel off and Dixie style, I can live with that. And I think that we have to come up with a program that is acceptable, that they can dance this program after class. This is a major change, a really major change. We are taking what we have today and it's almost tearing it up and starting over. People resist major changes. I'm wondering if a major change would be accepted. one way I see of doing this is to look ahead maybe 3-4 years and say, this is our goal. The entry level will include these basics and something akin to the list we have on our hands this morning in this room, and make our changes gradually over the period of time until we arrive at this goal. I can live with this as an entry level, and if we want to use other calls, then they become the next level up the list. But if these are the ones that are being danced currently throughout the country, then let's make this our entry-level program so that people can come in the activity, dance, learn dance for a year, and then dance after they finish class. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
I'm Bob Baker from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The thing that scares me right now is the number of lists that we've got running around, the combined list, the boldface and italics, deferred calls, and so on like that. And I'm afraid that we're going to leave New Orleans with about 5 lists running around the country. And I think there's probably 4,000 callers out in USA that don't belong to CALLERLAB. And that's the first reaction they're going to have. That CALLERLAB is throwing a whole bunch of new lists at us and no standardization. And that scares me. That really scares me. The combined list that has been come up with, I can live with that. I've been calling long enough that I like Dixie style, but I can call without Dixie style. I can call a dance with 50 basics if I need to. Hopefully that being calling long enough, I can remember some of those kind of things. So the combined list, I can live with, and I think it's a good program. The only thing that concerns me about the combined list is that I think that we should phase it in over several years by using the list that's either delayed or in italics, and phasing out over a period of 3 or 4 years some of those calls, and then reaching the combined list in 3 or 4 years. I think if we jump into the combined list all at once, that we're going to have a bunch of mad callers and dancers out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Rahal from Seattle, Washington. I got to adjust this thing. Hold on. I think what's really important, and the question that needs to be asked is, how many of us actually asked our dancers what they wanted before we came here? I know in the Seattle area, we're predominantly mainstream. We work very hard at maintaining our mainstream program and have well-defined lines between mainstream and plus. And when these lists came out, as president of the College Association, I said to my guys, I said, you know, we really need to talk to our dancers and ask them what they want to do, not those of us who are members of CALLERLAB say, this is what CALLERLAB says we should do. Because I consistently hear from my dancers, why is CALLERLAB dictating our dance programs? We're the dancers. You guys can do whatever you want to, but if we don't show up, you don't exist. So if we're going to make a major change throughout the country in the dance programs, I think we owe it to the dancers to ask them what they want. And I don't think we've done that. I think we're sitting in this room making decisions for the dancers when those are the people who should be making those decisions. The other concern I have is I don't have a problem with adding plus calls to the mainstream list and going back and trying to sell that to my dancers, even though I have some dancers who say, I don't want to dance plus, I want to dance mainstream. I've danced mainstream for 25 years and that's all I want to do. And I respect that in them. And I call a mainstream dance for them and I don't force plus calls on them. The concern I have is how are we going to go back and sell it to those dancers who have danced mainstream for 25 years, all of a sudden saying, if you're going to dance this new program we've got, you're going to have to learn some plus calls. What I want right now. So I guess the whole thing I get to is we can sit in this room all day and hash out what we want to do, but I think we're focusing on the wrong people. We ought not be making these major decisions. The dancers ought to be given some input, and I don't know how you do that in a country this size other than you hope that these guys are speaking for their dancers. Yeah. But the only thing I ask is that you ask your dancers, because when I asked my dancers what they wanted, my 2 mainstream clubs here's what the list is, here's what CALLERLAB is suggesting we do, what do you want to do? And I got nothing but thumbs down, with a couple exceptions. I had a couple people said that might not be a bad idea. We've learned those calls before. But I think we need to go back and focus on that, because if we try to cram it down their throats, and I know in the Seattle area, and I respect I got to go back and sell this now if this is what it goes, because I wear the CALLERLAB badge. And if I got to go back and sell it, it's not going to be easy, and I'm going to meet a lot of resistance. And so for that reason, I get up and say, hey, this is not going to work for me.
Mike, thank you. Mike, could I interrupt you just for a second, please? And time to read the mail, guys. This is the part of the program where we dip into our letterbox. We've received a number of letters throughout the year, and I just think it's obligatory of us to let you know what the sentiment is that's coming into the front office, okay? I followed up on, I just took the mail from January through about mid-March. It's been coming in all year long, but if I brought all of it in, I'd have to pack another suitcase. The sentiment that's coming in from North Dakota. Some of these are dancers and some of the callers, associations and whatnot. I'll let you know what is what. From North Dakota, they're saying, basically, we don't like it. They're saying it's going to lead to acceleration through the PLUS programs. They like what they got, and they don't want to change. Incidentally, let me give you the numbers on this right off the bat. There are 13 letters. I'm not going to read them all. I'll capsulize them for you. Of the 13 letters, 12 are against. 1 is for. For my own edification, I'll read the one that's for now. The Kentucky Callers Association got together and said, this is out of Louisville, Kentucky now, that general region. We talked to all our callers, and we recognize the fact that all the callers in the area are not members of this association, are not members of CALLERLAB. If there's any chance for standardization at all, it's going to be through this new program, and they have voted to go with the new program, talking about the combined mainstream and plus. Now, that is an area that considers themselves to be primarily mainstream. However, they did an analysis and found out that they really weren't. I guess. It says our dance area consists of 99 clubs, 3 APD all-plus clubs. About 20 of those clubs sprinkle the popular plus calls in the program. Their advertised levels are mainstream 13, no advertised level 45, popular plus 1, mainstream 4. And after that analysis, they took a position that if there's any hope for standardization, it might come through the combined program. Out of Washington, we received a number of letters. And though I'm not familiar with that general area myself, I understand a lot of them come from the greater Seattle area. And there's a hall out there, unidentified to me, and most of the clubs that dance in that hall sent us separate letters. They all really come from a single source, so to speak. They like mainstream. The dancers like it. They're doing it. It's fun. And they don't want any change. Simple and to the point. Don't change it. They're saying, do not change anything. That's Lois Brabant, the Square Steppers up in Bremerton. Out of Florissant, Missouri, Andy Curran wrote me a note. I wear a black hat in Andy's eyes. He doesn't like it, and he doesn't like me. I don't know Andy. But he feels very strongly about it, and his dancers feel very strongly about it, and I sure appreciate his viewpoint. I'd like to buy him dinner sometime. Donna Hubert wrote back after I corresponded with her from Belfair, Washington. I wrote these folks a letter, and I said, you know, my involvement in this thing is on the experimental basis. I'm kind of helping to control the experiment, if you will. Are you using this program with plus clubs? She wrote back and said, no. She doesn't like it, doesn't think it works. My only suggestion is it won't work in a mainstream environment. Just clean off the shelf. I really don't I don't think it will. You're teaching your dancers to do something that they're not going to use when they finally graduate. You got to say something?
I got to interrupt you.
I'm only halfway through my mailbox.
I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt you a minute. And this has been a sore point with me all year, and the reason I say a sore point, I'm on the Board of Governors, and I get all this mail, too. He's talking about these people writing, they don't like it, they don't like it, they don't like it. If you've got a strong mainstream program and everybody's happy with it, you shouldn't be considering this at all. This is the point we left Baltimore with last year. We got one letter that really upset me from Illinois. This came from a club, not from a caller association and not from a caller. It came from a club. It was signed by all the club officers like a petition, and it was very adamant, and you could tell now from this letter that I don't have any idea who the caller was. Doesn't matter to me. This caller went back to this group and said, here's a new program CALLERLAB says you have to use. That is not correct. This is an experimental thing. And all these people that have a real strong mainstream program, nobody's trying to force anything on them at all. Just, use what you're doing. Leave it alone. Be happy with it. But there are some of us, or some other people, that don't have, and they're having a problem, and that's what we're trying to help, is that problem. Okay?
That's a little short-sighted, but I agree with most of what he said. My sympathy goes with the callers who are looking down the road, because I am too. And I think you all might have heard me say yesterday, and I firmly believe this, we cannot coexist with these two dance programs downstream. Something has got to come together at some point in time, or we're just aggravating the problem. The problem will never be solved. At any rate, right now, Darryl, what Darryl said is really absolutely true. We are truly right now in the experimental stage. Can we just all appreciate that? That this is not a dance program per se. It does not have the CALLERLAB seal of approval. That if we leave New Orleans with, or New Orleans, on Wednesday morning with this experimental list in our hands and the mainstream italicized, bold-faced italicized list in our hands, that they are all experimental. Experimental. They are not rubber-stamped yet. And I'll be the first one to fight rubber stamping of these programs until I am positively sure that it's going to be beneficial to square dancing. And I'm not sure yet. The mail continues, and it says we don't like it. Peoria, Illinois writes in. Callers Association. They don't like it. They've tried it, and they don't like it. They talked it over. They just don't like it. We've heard from a number of callers associations who have voted not to use the combined mainstream plus program. Now, that sounds awfully negative, and I'm in a room full of people that the majority of you you're trying to use this dance program, so what's the point? The point is, we recognize there are areas where this program will not work, and we cannot advocate this experimental program in those areas. If you are in an area that is currently dancing mainstream, don't teach these calls. You're not doing a service to your dancers or to yourself. It's just not going to work yet. Give us a chance to play with it, to see if there's any value to it. If there is, then we can work with something new. Until that time, would you please continue to use your mainstream lists, use the Martin Mallard experiment if you'd like, from the mainstream committee. But don't teach Relay the Deucey if your dancers don't want to do it. We need it. We have to teach it. If our dancers don't know load the boat when they graduate, they get blown out of the water. That aggravates our dropout problem. It's a problem for us, and we're going to try to solve it, okay? If it's not a problem for you, please don't use it, but keep the cards and letters coming. Next.
There's one thing that's been bothering me about this whole mess. Number one.
Do we have a name again,
I'm
please?
Red Porter out of Pasadena, Texas. We eliminate moves off the list. We eliminate things that have been tried and true. Why the quarterly moves? That's my question. Why do we even have a quarterly moves? They got to push something off the list.
Why do we have quarterly selections? Is that the question?
Yeah.
I'd like to be able to answer that myself, and I'm sure a lot of you have an answer for that too, but that doesn't really address itself to the question of the combined mainstream and plus.
Yeah, it does, because you eliminate this off of here, and then you're adding more moves that you got to teach anyway.
Okay, I think I understand your rationale. I appreciate that. Thank you. But let's just follow with what we have now and see how this experiment is running.
Wayne Jansen from California. I've been listening to a lot of these things, and I've heard it year after year. I don't understand why we as members of CALLERLAB go back and tell our people, this is what CALLERLAB wants. We're here to make a decision as to what we're going to teach and try to standardize. Now, we can go back and tell them, well, we've made some decisions and we're going to try them as the experimental situation. But a lot of the guys go back, and gals go back and say, well, now CALLERLAB wants this. No wonder we're in such bad straits with the organizations, because they're saying that we're dictating, and we're just trying to get something to standardize. And if we all use the same kind of lists, then, we can dance anywhere in the world, and that's what we've been trying to do. But we go back and tell them CALLERLAB wants this, or CALLERLAB says this, and we're sticking our necks in the noose, because then they become aggravated with us. Why blame CALLERLAB? We're here to discuss, and we're here to try to find a solution. And if we go back and try the solutions and not get down to the nitty-gritty and say this is a change, but try it on an experimental basis, and try to keep CALLERLAB in a good light in the dancers' eyes, not as dictators, so to speak, because the more we do this, and the more we come up and say, hey, there's another list change, the more aggravated they're going to get, and it's going to get worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. I really know more than anybody how much money we all spend to come to these conventions. Maybe not as much as Jerry has, but in 12 years. And I know it's important that we all say what's on our mind. Could we just speak to the issue the first time until everybody's had a chance to speak? Now, if you want to say something about the existence of the list and the program, that's fine, but would you please keep in mind that what we have to walk out of this session with is possible changes to this experimental program as designed by the Red Bates Committee. It was put into your hands to use, and hopefully those of you who have tried it or looked at it might have some thoughts about what's on it that you like, or what's on it that you don't like, what's missing from it, or something like that. So make your comments. I don't mean to turn you off, but please, if we can have some comments about the list itself, we'd appreciate it.
Well, it's Chris Veer again. I only have a comment, and I had the comment ready, and it's not about the list per se. You say that in self-defense, you have to graduate your students, and they have to know load the boat and relay the doozy. I would have to say that is the fault of the callers in your area, and if a dance is listed as a mainstream dance and a caller comes in, the first thing he calls is load the boat, somebody ought to be taking $5 out of his paycheck. And if everybody would do that, if a dance is listed as mainstream, and if a caller got docked $5 for every plus call he called at that mainstream dance, maybe he'd quit doing it and learn his trade and call the level he's supposed to.
Yeah. That's a good idea. I have to comment to that. In Northern California, the area I'm talking about, Chris, we have in our association 297 square dance clubs. 3 of them are mainstream. And right, suppose if it's plus. See, that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that our dancers are going to a mainstream dance and getting load the boat. What I'm saying is that when they graduate, they're probably going to be going to a plus dance. That's our problem. And it might just be our problem. I don't think that it's not just our problem, but it might be.
Don Beck, New England. I come from an area, probably like Kip's, that most of the clubs are plus. and it's not a soft plus in the respect that they only dance a few of the plus calls. Half of the clubs danced 85% reasonably well. The other half danced 95% very well. It's interesting from what I've been hearing that most of the people that say we like what we have, don't change it, are the areas that do mainstream. Our area, first of all, has what I think very strong clubs, not in size, somewhat in dancing ability, but in leadership. The clubs dictate what's happening. They hire people to call dances or teach classes or workshops and say, well, this is what we're doing, this is what we want to learn. And if I went to a club that hired me to call a plus dance and say, I'm only going to call a mainstream dance, it's not going to work. Now, granted, I don't call all the plus calls all the time. But anyway, I wanted to give a thought on some plus clubs complaining about the combined list, too. Last September, we did not have the combined list that we were hoping for. Now, I call class for one club, granted a unique group, and I won't get into it, but I created my own combined list, which overlaps the one we finally came up with somewhat, in principle very closely, with the same thoughts in mind. I taught that class, taught those calls to it, with the goal to have them be able to dance at plus clubs at the end of the class. The club officers and members were very pleased that their new class members could dance at plus dances at the end of the thing. But they also were astute enough to know that I had left a number of calls out. And they said, great, our dancers can dance. Now teach us the rest of the calls that they're eventually going to need. In other words, they complained, they said this shortcut, abbreviated mainstream plus list is not adequate because I know our dancers are going to need the rest. They didn't like it from the other end rather than the mainstream.
Thank you, Don.
Hello, I'm Jim Hobson from Northbrook, that's Chicago area, which is predominantly plus. I have the one mainstream club in Chicago area. I have not worked with this experimental program, but I would like to offer the following observations. And some of these observations started when I was dancing, not calling, and I don't think I've changed my opinion on some of this, is I think that perhaps there are other alternatives. And I think the alternative would be, instead of subtracting, is to add. And where we need to add is the plus list. We have approximately 28 to 30 calls on the plus list. Many callers will teach that plus list 3 calls a night. That's 10 weeks. And they say, okay, you are now a plus dancer. That it jump to get into that plus program is much too easy. If we had a significant number of calls and calls with meat on them in that level, I think that would go a long way towards solving this problem. And that way, we're not taking something away from somebody, we're adding.
Thank you. We're coming up to breakout time. And so, yeah, Mike, we're going to take care of these 3. Up to Don. Don, you make your comments, too. You guys stick to a couple of minutes apiece, and we'll be able to go to have a cup of coffee, which I dearly need.
You know, we started this session yesterday in the considerations and implementation program, and we designed that session so that people could talk and could argue and could discuss. And the whole session was spent with everybody coming up and giving their perspective from their particular area. And it was obvious when we finished that session that everybody has a different perspective of where the dancers are coming from in that area. And I think that we can talk and talk forever, but we have to realize that dancers enter our activity via a beginner's class and go into a mainstream club, or dancers enter our activity by going through a beginner's class and going into a plus club. And there's different reasons why that occurs, call it caller leadership or dancer leadership. We have to realize that callers are not the only leaders in the activity. There's dance associations are very big in some areas, and some areas they're not. But the bottom line is that people come in two areas. Their clubs are mainstream and their clubs are plus. And there's some places where there's a little bit of both of it mixing. That's one of the reasons why we have 2 rooms. This room is handling the 25-week mainstream and plus, and over in the next room they're handling this bold-faced italicized, which addresses the mainstream list only. And all year long, as Darryl was saying earlier, we've been dealing with the confusion, people misinterpreting these lists. People from the mainstream community sending us letters that say that we can't use this list. It was not intended for the mainstream community. That was the list next door. Now,
I agree, or would like to someday imagine these two rooms joining together and all of us joining together so that all our new dancers come into the same program. I don't know if that's possible this year or next year or the year after or whatever. But what we seem to be addressing in this room is this 25-week program that was designed as a feeder program, as an entry level for people whose classes go to the Plus program. And we have to address that. And if someday we're going to find a final solution, as Kip says, granted, maybe we can find it here, but it seems like as long as these two rooms are meeting in separate places, I don't think that that's possible, at least at this point in time. Let's address this list as it applies to entry level and as it was written in the special committee report as a feeder to Plus clubs. If we're going to talk about mainstream, maybe we should be in, those that involved in that aspect of the activity should maybe be in the next room over there. Someday we may be able to combine, but we should look at the big picture here.
Thank you, Mike.
I'm Jim Compton from Seattle, Washington, and this is a list. If you'll look at it, if you'll recall that most of the Plus things that's on this list used to be our quarterly selections. They took them away from us and put them up into Plus.
Who's they?
CALLERLAB, I guess.
Wait a minute now.
Okay.
CALLERLAB doesn't vote. Callers vote.
Okay, the callers vote. They voted to move them from the quarterly selection.
Who voted?
Well, I wasn't in it on most of that their part, so I don't know.
Could it have been people in the mainstream quarterly selections committee?
It could have been.
Could have been.
Okay, but I feel that this
They took it away then.
Okay, they took it away. My clubs that I call for want to know why they want to put this back in to make our clubs satellite clubs for the Plus clubs, and we feel that it's not worth it.
We really appreciate that. We really do. I guess what we're saying is help us. We're really saying help us, because if you don't help us, what you're witnessing here already is a bunch of contrivances. We have to go out and do it somehow. We're going to go out and do it somehow. This gives us a method to do it in a standard way. Help us. Don? We kind of closed the debate a little bit after dawn because... Oh, I'm sorry. We've got time. We'll take it. Come on. Okay.
I'm not going to be too long. Don Hanhurst from Venice, Florida. First off, I'd like to take exception for what you mentioned the purpose of this meeting is. From our thing, the purpose of this meeting is to decide whether we like or dislike the effort to combine the list. It has nothing to do with what's on the list. Do we like or dislike the effort to combine it? That's what this meeting is about. So the purpose of addressing what's on this list is immaterial if we can't first address whether we like or dislike the effort to combine the list. That's what this meeting is about according to the program.
I'll speak to John about that.
Yeah, well, whether it was John's typo or whose, the thing is that's why some of us are here, not to discuss the list, but whether or not we like the combined effort of combining the list. Just quickly, I think everybody has to agree that lifestyles vary. The lifestyle in California varies from that in Kansas, from that in Florida. When we made the lists, as far as I'm concerned, and we've been with CALLERLAB 12 years, it was kind of a compilation of those who have the quick, fast lifestyle and those who have the very laid-back lifestyle that can be achieved by most everybody. And for those of us with a quick lifestyle, we can then add the plus. And again, that was my thinking as to what the plus really was. It's the top of after the mainstream, which everybody could do in a given length of time, 41 weeks being much too long, we could eventually achieve. But the plus is only an added feature for those lifestyles that are higher and faster paced than some of the others in the country. And what I think some of us that Chris addressed is the universality of square dancing. Please do not forget the universality of square. It is not Northern California. It is not Southern Florida. It is not the heartland of America, but it's the world. It's Sweden. It's Denmark. It's Germany. It's Japan. It's Saudi Arabia. It's Brazil. And all these people have taken our 12-year mainstream program and say we will work with it and are working with it. If we can't, as I spoke to you on the phone, if we can't, that's fine. But that is not the world's problem. That's our individual little area's problem and should not be addressed by the world, but rather by our individual area. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Don, if you had to follow that up with a positive suggestion, would you say that we shelve this? Okay.
Kenny Ferris, Laurel, Maryland. First of all, I think we should give a big hand to these two guys up here. I think they're doing a real good job, and they've said a lot of good words. Really enjoyed your remarks earlier there, Kip. the things I was hearing from the guys who have already tried this and completed it were that they finished and they still didn't put these people into their clubs. They said, well, we had a dance before the real dance, you know. So have we really got a program that's bringing our dancers into square dancing if they're still over here and they're not dancing with the current square dancers? I don't think so. And the program that we've got here, we have 55 calls on this list of deferred calls to teach later. Is that realistic, that we can workshop 55 calls later at the clubs? Do the clubs really want to take club time, workshopping, 55 calls? We're not going to have square dances anymore. We're going to have workshops and nothing else. We really need to shorten the lists. I mean, this is a little facade we're trying to put over the whole picture, and I think Kip has said it, a number of us have said it. We need to shorten our lists, whether it's the mainstream lists, and I think we're moving towards shortening the mainstream list. I think that's going to happen. And everybody's talking about, yeah, let's get rid of those calls on the mainstream list. I don't hear anyone willing to get rid of calls on the plus list. We had one plus meeting scheduled this whole festival, which was yesterday at 5 o'clock, okay? And we got them to agree to suggest removing one call, okay? And what could you do in an hour and a half anyway? But the attitude is, whoa, yeah, take them off of mainstream, but don't touch that plus list. There's something sacred about the plus list. They don't want to get rid of any of those calls. We don't want to give it up. I don't know, but I wanted to show you the plus list in 1976. We have eliminated, these were on the original plus list: Clover Flow, Grand Parade, Ice Cold, Pair Off, Red Hot, Substitute, and I think there's been a few others. But we have deleted plus calls before, folks. It's okay. We can live without a few. And I think the real answer is going to be when we sit down and have enough to take some action in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. Anybody have any sentiments about deleting the plus program? It's time for us to take a break. Let's continue in individual conversations out in the corridor, have a cup of coffee. We'll meet back here in 20 minutes. Analysis and feedback on the combined mainstream and plus program. We've gotten lots of feedback, not a heck of a lot of analysis yet, but we're meeting again and got another hour and a half to do it in. Darryl has a few comments that he'd like to make, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about plus. I hope I won't bore you to tears, but I think it's something that we all should keep in mind and remember how plus came about.
I have two comments, and they are really from the discussions we just had, and I think they both tie into what Kip will talk about in just a minute. In all of when each person gets up, just about, not everybody, but when everybody gets up to the microphone there and they talk, and out in the hall when they talk, we have one little bitty thing that I think is a great big problem. And it's one little letter that is also a word, and it's I. Each one of us gets up here and we say, I do this, and I do that. Or you can also make that analogous to we. We do this at our club, and we do this at our club. And all that's fine and good. I think what we need to do, I personally think that what we need to do to help square dancing in general is to try our best to put those two words in the background and do basically what Don Henhurst said just a minute ago, and that is look at the overall picture. you might have to vote, or you might decide you want to vote for something that might be a little contrary to what you are doing right now, or your club might be doing right now. But I want you to look at the things we discussed hard enough to look over what might be working real well for you at this moment, and let's try to look at what's going to work best for square dancing in general, all over everywhere. I had one other comment from a discussion, and that was one of the best comments I think I've heard altogether out there from everybody was, we really need, I think, as I mentioned before, we are in agreement we need a shorter teaching time. And as Mike Seastrom said, we have a group in here doing one thing, and we're doing another thing in here. And, of course, right at this moment, we can't take that wall down and get it all together. We'd have more arguments when we get through in 10 days. But one of the major things we really need, and Keith Ripito said this a while ago, is an entry teaching program for everybody. And I think perhaps the term mainstream, just the word mainstream, has a stigma to it right now that may be hurting us. So while we're considering this combined list, which is the purpose of our meeting and everything, we might also be thinking along the lines of some way or another getting all these people together, this group and the group next door, and let's come up with an entry program which is feasible, that maybe everybody can accept. You might not like it necessarily for your particular area, and some things on it they might not like for their particular area, but it will be one particular thing that we can all use. And it might not be a bad idea to consider getting away from the term basic and mainstream and pick a popular name of some kind. I don't know what it might be, but a popular name, and that will be our entry teaching program, which in effect would be some type of perhaps a combined list like we're talking about. Thank you.
Wouldn't that be interesting just to call it square dancing? Yeah. From Chris Veer. Let me just give you a little bit of history, especially for those of you who have been new to the organization since about 78, 79, and 80. When we first tackled the whole question of making what we are now calling mainstream, we had to get a bunch of guys in a room, in a great big room, and all of them more or less listed what they really liked and what they didn't like. They all had to vote to give up something or to accept something that they weren't currently using, and we finally ended up with a list that we called mainstream. What kept haunting us was the fact that there was a large enough number of our members who were using some additional calls besides those that were agreed to. Those calls eventually were added to what was not really a program. It was an extension of mainstream called Mainstream-Plus. It started out with 17 additional calls on it. After that, incidentally, I have to emphasize, that was mainstream. It was still part of the mainstream program. It was not a separate dance program. It was called Mainstream-Plus. After that, in subsequent conventions, additional callers would come in and say, we really need some more calls. There are more calls out there being used a whole lot. And to the 17 calls, they added another 9. And they call that Mainstream+2, hyphenated. Still an extension of the mainstream program and not a separate dance program. It wasn't until the early 80s where they made and I even forget the convention, but they made an attempt to combine the +1 and the +2 together, that a brand new dance program evolved called Plus. The Plus committee was formed, it did its own voting, and the creation of an additional dance program came about. We might have made a mistake. We might have made a mistake. We're telling the mainstream community, maybe you were right. Maybe we should have just stayed with the original 69 basics that became mainstream and not gotten involved in anything beyond that. Because of the way that we capitulated, we eventually led to the evolving of a new dance program, which has caused some of the problems that we see today. Instead of asking our dancers to regress, how about we do a little regression?
I'm looking again for that single standard that we can go back to, that we can all use and be satisfied with, and learning the lessons from the past that we can all preserve with the same zeal that the successful mainstream calls around the world have pursued and used to preserve their mainstream programs. I'm not ready to accept the argument that we destroyed mainstream, because I'm really not ready to accept the argument that in some areas mainstream ever existed at all. It was mainstream hyphen plus. That's what existed. We have an opportunity now maybe to bring this all together. Now, how about if we go out on the limb? It's my favorite place to be. When the alley fight is over, I'm the one left face down the pool of blood when the cops come. So I'll go out on the limb. I'll make a suggestion to you. Suppose we opened up these doors right now, hypothetically, and said, okay, mainstream community, we'll take whatever you have right now, mainstream bold-faced calls. Incidentally, the difference between that and the mainstream list that we have is only 3 calls. We don't have Cross Trail Through, we don't have Cloverleaf, and we don't have Star Promenade. Okay, that's what we don't have. That's the difference that we're talking about. Say, okay, you can put those 3 on if you'd like, but let us put on the 8 plus calls that are on this list. Let us combine it that way, and that's going to be mainstream. That, we all agree, will be mainstream. Let's take everything that's left over, all the plus calls we haven't discussed, all the italicized calls, let's kick them all upstairs into the new plus. That will add some meat to that plus program. Hopefully that will preserve or prevent the dancers from rushing through it so quickly and getting involved in advanced dancing. And hopefully it will give us a common point, once again, where we can begin to teach our dancers the same calls. Hopefully we'll be able to run a national convention where the mainstream hall is twice the size of any other hall. Boy, I'd love to see that again. I would really love to see that again. Hopefully we'll be able to take the 60% of the dancers around the world that is currently dancing mainstream and the 35% that are currently dancing plus and combine them into 75% of our dancers doing the same thing again. Pie in the sky, maybe. Hard pill to swallow. Who said leadership was going to be easy? Floor is open for discussion.
Got quiet. I love the idea of calling it square dancing. I think it would probably be a lot more realistic for us if we back up a little and see what our purpose as square dance callers is. What we are doing is selling people a social activity, we hope. And in order for us to...
Did you say Chris Veer yet?
No, I didn't. You just did.
Okay.
Thank you. And I think that we need to regress, if you like that, if you like that word, and re-emphasize what square dancing is supposed to be for most people at the entry level, and let's call it square dancing. And let's make it a 25-week learning process, and let's call that square dancing. And then, if they have the time and the inclination to go further than that, let's call it whatever we want to call it, but let's make that another 25-week learning process. Let's make it a whole season for whatever levels we have. Let's make that level, each level, another whole season's learning process. But let us please have square dancing as a social activity, as our tree trunk, and so that all of our little branches, all our plus and our A and whatever else, the round dancing, whatever we else have that feeds off of that tree trunk, if that trunk is solid and strong, then our tree's going to be strong and all of those programs will flourish. If we feed all of those programs and we chop that, we put too much into the initial learning process for most people to assimilate and enjoy, then we're going to kill the tree. And then the branches are going to die too.
This group got awfully quiet, awfully fast, didn't they? A little bit of applause for the men.
And I think as Don said, that our discussion is to the merit of this particular list. We all agree that we need to have a list, but we're discussing the merits of this list, and I think that this list does not have a lot of merit.
Thank you, Chris. Richard Silver from North Carolina. I'm against the 25-week lesson list. However, I'm 100% for what your suggestion just came up with. The simple fact that we possibly need a lower entry level is a great idea to use this, and then possibly move all the rest of the calls up to and make the plus list bigger. I've heard for years that we need a wider space between mainstream and plus, and a wider space between plus and advance. Now, I am against calling the 25-week lesson square dancing, because all levels from the beginning clear up through C2 or 3 or 4 is square dancing. But I am in agreement with you when you said call it mainstream, and then make a large space between mainstream and a plus, and I'm in 100% agreement with you on your suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. You and my wife makes 2. And yeah, I'm not sure about my wife.
Charlie?
Charlie Muff, Los Angeles, California. Even though we don't always agree, I have to say that what you just suggested sounds like one of the better things I've heard so far at the convention. And I'm wondering if we could take that possibly a step further in saying if we could tell those people, or those of us that use mainstream, let's take these calls on that, whatever the mainstream committee or the mainstream organization working over there comes up with, and maybe we could even say, okay, well, can we add 4 or 5 of the plus calls? I really want to see it kept to a minimum, because we need to keep the teaching time down. But some compromise like that, maybe we don't have to go with all 8 of these. Maybe we could suffer with a couple of them that we don't have on there, or that we do have on there that we don't need. But I think that, to me, that sounds like a good way to go, or at least a way to proceed.
It gives us a direction. I'm really interested in hearing from some of the guys from Seattle, Washington, and some of the mainstream community. I bounced this idea, incidentally, off of